this episode, we're going to connect two ideas that often live in separate rooms inside an organization: the long-term plan the business cares about, and the technical choices that quietly pile up over time until everything feels messy. When those ideas stay apart, teams tend to chase quick wins, buy tools that overlap, and build systems that do not fit together, even when everyone has good intentions. The result is not just extra software, but extra confusion, extra cost, and extra risk because nobody can clearly explain how all the pieces are supposed to work as one. Strategic planning is supposed to help an organization choose where to invest and why, but it can accidentally create a shopping list if there is no design discipline behind it. The purpose here is to show how enterprise architecture, EA, becomes that discipline, not as a rigid rulebook, but as a practical way to keep solutions connected to strategy so the organization grows intentionally instead of sprawling randomly. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Enterprise architecture, or EA, is best understood as a shared map and set of design decisions that describe how an organization's capabilities, processes, information, and technology fit together to deliver outcomes. It is not just an IT diagram, and it is not a binder full of frameworks. It is a way of thinking that asks, how does this new idea fit our target direction, and what does it depend on? A strategic plan describes goals, priorities, and time horizons, while EA describes the structure that makes those goals achievable without creating chaos. When EA is missing from planning, decisions are often made based on excitement, urgency, or vendor promises, and those decisions can be reasonable in isolation while still being harmful in combination. Solution sprawl happens when the organization accumulates many separate tools and systems that overlap, duplicate data, and require special knowledge to operate. Preventing sprawl does not mean never adding solutions. It means adding them in a way that strengthens a coherent ecosystem instead of fragmenting it. To understand sprawl, it helps to picture an organization as a city that is constantly building new roads and buildings without a zoning plan. Every new project feels urgent, and every team just wants a route that works for them today, so shortcuts get built everywhere. After a while, traffic becomes unpredictable because streets do not connect cleanly, and maintaining the city becomes expensive because every neighborhood has unique designs and utilities. In technology terms, sprawl shows up as multiple systems doing the same job, different departments storing the same customer data in different formats, and integration work that becomes a permanent tax on every new initiative. Beginners sometimes assume sprawl is mainly a technical cleanliness issue, but it is really a strategic execution issue because it slows the organization down and makes change harder. If leaders cannot reliably answer what systems support which outcomes, then they also cannot confidently prioritize, measure progress, or manage risk. EA provides a way to keep the city growing in a coordinated way while still allowing development. The most important link between EA and strategic planning is the idea of capabilities, which are the stable things an organization must be able to do to deliver value. A capability is not a specific tool, and it is not a job title. It is more like the organization's set of muscles, such as handling orders, managing suppliers, delivering services, or resolving customer issues. A strategic plan should often be translated into a statement like, "We need to strengthen certain capabilities to reach our goals," and EA helps define what strengthening looks like in terms of processes, information, and technology changes. Without that translation, initiatives can be framed as shopping decisions, like buy a new platform, migrate to a new tool, or implement a new dashboard. Those are solution-shaped decisions, and solution-shaped decisions naturally invite sprawl because different groups choose different solutions for similar needs. Capability-based planning encourages reuse because it asks whether a new effort can build on an existing capability rather than creating a parallel one. One misconception beginners sometimes carry is that EA is only useful after the strategy is already set, like a technical team cleaning up details after the business has decided what it wants. In reality, EA works best when it is part of the strategic conversation early, because architecture questions can reveal hidden complexity and prevent unrealistic commitments. For example, a plan to expand into a new market might sound simple until EA identifies that the current customer identity approach cannot support multiple regions or regulatory regimes without major redesign. That insight does not block the strategy. It improves it by shaping sequencing and investment. When EA participates in planning, it can help leaders choose a path that creates options rather than constraints. It can also expose where the organization is paying for the same thing multiple times, which is a strategic problem because money and attention are limited. Integrating EA into planning means strategy becomes more executable and less likely to lead to scattered, conflicting projects. A practical way EA prevents sprawl is by maintaining a target architecture, which is a description of the desired future state that aligns with strategic goals. Target architecture does not need to be a perfect prediction of the future, but it should be clear enough to guide decisions, like a destination and a few major route choices. For beginners, it helps to think of target architecture as guardrails and milestones, not as a complete blueprint of every detail. It might describe which core platforms are strategic, how key data should be managed, and what integration patterns are preferred so systems can talk reliably. When a new initiative appears, the first question becomes, does this move us toward the target, or does it create a new island that we will have to bridge later? If it creates an island, EA can propose alternatives, like extending an existing platform, reusing shared services, or sequencing work so foundational pieces come first. Over time, repeated decisions aligned to target architecture significantly reduce the likelihood of sprawl. Another way EA supports planning is through principles and standards that are simple enough for leaders to understand and apply. A principle might be that customer data should have a single authoritative source, or that systems must expose interfaces for integration rather than relying on manual exports. Standards might define which identity approach is used, how logging is done, or which types of platforms are approved for certain workloads. The point is not to create rules for their own sake. The point is to reduce decision friction and avoid reinvention. When principles are clear, project teams can make faster choices because they know what good looks like in the organization. When standards are absent or ignored, teams often choose what is familiar or what seems fastest in the moment, and that is how overlapping tools proliferate. Integrating EA into strategic planning ensures that principles and standards are considered alongside goals, so the strategy does not accidentally encourage teams to take incompatible paths. You can also think of EA as the organization's memory, because it captures why certain design decisions were made and what trade-offs were accepted. Without that memory, new leaders or new teams can unknowingly repeat old mistakes, such as selecting a tool that was previously retired for a good reason. Strategy cycles tend to bring new energy and new priorities, which is healthy, but it also increases the risk of forgetting lessons learned. When EA participates in planning, it can provide context like, we already have a platform that supports this, or we tried a similar approach and here is why it failed. That context does not have to be negative. It can also highlight strengths, like existing integration capabilities that make a new initiative easier than expected. This memory function helps prevent sprawl because it reduces the chances of parallel solutions being created simply due to lack of awareness. In other words, EA helps the organization behave like a coordinated system rather than a collection of separate groups. Integrating EA into planning also changes how investment decisions are framed, because it shifts the discussion from projects to portfolios of capabilities and architecture outcomes. A project is temporary, but sprawl is often created by many temporary projects that leave permanent fragments behind. When planning uses EA, leaders can ask different questions, like which initiatives strengthen shared foundations, which ones reduce redundancy, and which ones create new dependencies that must be managed. This encourages the organization to fund platform improvements, data foundations, and integration approaches that support multiple strategic goals at once. Beginners sometimes assume platform work is boring and unrelated to strategy, but it is often the difference between scaling smoothly and repeatedly rebuilding. When the plan includes both business outcomes and architecture outcomes, teams can deliver features without creating long-term mess. This approach also helps explain why some work must happen before other work, not as bureaucracy, but as sequencing that prevents later rework. A key teaching point is that preventing sprawl is not only about technology choices, because sprawl can also happen at the process and information levels. Two departments can use the same tool and still create sprawl if they define processes differently, collect data differently, and interpret results differently. EA helps here by connecting business process architecture and information architecture to technology architecture, so choices align across layers. When EA is integrated into strategic planning, it can highlight where process harmonization is needed before automation, or where data definitions must be agreed upon before analytics initiatives will produce reliable outcomes. This is especially important in governance, because governance aims to ensure IT investments support enterprise objectives, not just local optimizations. If the strategy calls for better customer experience, but each team defines customer differently, the organization may invest heavily and still fail to improve experience. EA provides the structure to make the strategy real across the enterprise, not just within isolated projects. Another misconception is that using EA in planning will slow everything down, because people imagine a heavy approval process that blocks innovation. The opposite can happen when EA is done well, because clear architecture direction speeds up decisions by reducing debate and uncertainty. When teams know the preferred platforms, integration patterns, and data approaches, they can start faster and avoid late-stage redesign. Innovation also improves because teams can build on shared foundations rather than rebuilding basics each time. For beginners, it helps to separate the idea of constraints from the idea of guardrails. Guardrails do not stop movement. They prevent dangerous exits. EA in strategic planning sets guardrails like, do not create a separate customer database, or do not introduce a new identity system without a strong reason. Within those boundaries, teams can still experiment, deliver new features, and adopt new capabilities that fit the overall direction. To make EA real inside strategic planning, there must be an ongoing connection between the planning cycle and the architecture process, not a one-time review. That connection includes bringing architects into early discussions, using architecture viewpoints that match leadership concerns, and ensuring every major initiative states how it aligns to the target architecture. It also includes feedback loops, because strategy can change and architecture must adapt while still protecting coherence. A practical signal of good integration is that project proposals naturally include architecture implications, like what platforms will be used, what data will be shared, and what dependencies exist. Another signal is that leaders can ask, how does this reduce or increase complexity? And the organization can answer with clarity rather than guesses. Over time, this creates a culture where architecture is not seen as an obstacle, but as part of making smart choices that last. That culture is one of the strongest defenses against solution sprawl. Sprawl often hides until it becomes painful, so another important idea is measuring complexity and redundancy in ways leaders can understand. EA can provide inventories and maps that show how many applications perform similar functions, how many data stores contain similar data, and how many integrations are required to keep things consistent. Strategic planning can then use that visibility to set intentional goals, like consolidating platforms, reducing duplicate tools, or standardizing certain capabilities. This is not about making everything uniform for its own sake. It is about reducing the number of moving parts that must be secured, maintained, and understood. For governance, fewer and clearer systems make risk management more effective because there are fewer unknowns. When complexity is visible, leaders can make trade-offs consciously, such as accepting some redundancy for speed in a limited situation, while still avoiding uncontrolled growth. EA turns hidden sprawl into manageable choices by making the landscape understandable. As you put all these pieces together, the main lesson is that strategic planning without EA tends to produce a pile of solutions, while strategic planning with EA tends to produce a coherent system that can grow. EA keeps attention on how choices fit together, how capabilities are strengthened, and how the organization moves toward a target state rather than drifting. It reduces sprawl by promoting reuse, by clarifying principles and standards, by shaping sequencing, and by making complexity visible so leaders can act before problems become emergencies. For brand new learners, the most useful mindset is to treat architecture as a planning tool that helps the organization keep promises, not as a technical artifact that only engineers care about. When EA is integrated into planning, the organization can move faster with less rework, spend money with less duplication, and manage risk with more confidence because the environment is understandable. That is exactly what governance aims to achieve, and it is why integrating EA into strategic planning is one of the most practical ways to prevent solution sprawl before it becomes the default.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit BareMetalCyber.com.